It's usually pretty easy to visualize the final steps of a process, like doing the chisel work in this stylized pine cone ornament I'm working on. I need to make multiples of these, and I want them to all look pretty much the same. But what's the step before the chisel work, and the step before that, and the step before that? Sometimes as blacksmiths, we need to be able to think backwards to get to that first step. I know I need a curved chisel, which luckily I already had. I wanted to be able to support this ornament while I did the chiseling, so I wanted to make a swage for that. I also wanted to be able to make multiples of these, so I made a set of spring swages so I could forge these under the power hammer. But to be able to make these tools, there's even another step before that, so I have to keep moving backwards. And that's what we're going to start with, is a preliminary step of making the master shape that will make these other tools. And by the time we're done with today's video, we will have this first test piece completed. Then I'll talk about what I would do different and things I might change before going on to the final project. Today's video is being made possible through the generous support from channel members and Patreon patrons. Now that certainly was not what I had in mind, but it's not going to put a stop to the process. I can work with it and I can make some repairs on this. But what do I think went wrong? There are a number of possibilities. Probably the least likely is that the steel had a flaw in it from the start, and that's where it failed. Probably not. It's probably something I did that made it fail. And that leaves a couple of possibilities. I might have forged some stress risers into that when I was forging it, some little micro cracks, and those then failed. But I don't think that's really the problem. I think it comes down to the heat treating. Now, this wasn't annealed before I did the grinding. It was normalized before the hardening process. So I don't think that's the problem. Very likely I got it too hot when I hardened it. That's one of the downsides of hardening just based on color coming out of the forge. It's easy to overheat things, and when you quench them you get a real large grain structure. And as I look at this, it looks like a pretty large grain structure, so I think that's the most likely cause for the failure, is that it was quenched too hot. The other possibility is that it simply wasn't tempered back far enough. I'm tempering in a toaster oven, and while that usually works pretty well, because I had this long handle on there, I had to leave the door open part way. So it may not have ever really gotten up to the tempering temperature I was aiming for. I was able to persevere, and I've got these dies pretty well roughed out. I think I want to make the repairs on this, get it put back together to do the final impression on the dies. I am letting the dies normalize while they cool, and I'm going to take the time to fix this. And I'm also letting this normalize. I'll tack weld it back on the handle, then preheat it, finish the weld. Then I'm going to normalize it again. This time I think I'll normalize it 3 times, and I'll cut the handle short enough that I can get it in my heat treat oven, and that should help guarantee better success the next round. But this kind of stuff happens sometimes. Don't let it frustrate you too much. Figure out what you got to do and get back to work. I took the time to normalize the 2 halves of the die again, just let them cool overnight. And these look pretty good. The outside edges of the die are pretty rough and irregular. That really doesn't matter. It's the impression that we're after, and the impression is not bad. It could still use just a little bit of refinement, but I'm going to do that after I weld the handle on here. And the only reason I'm going to clean up the outsides of this is to make it easier to line the handle up. So at the very least, I'm going to clean up the side where the handle goes on. But I imagine I'll clean up the end and the other side a little bit just to make them look better. Now on a die like this where you're sinking something in, there's a lot of suck in. The edges of the material are drawn down with the master, and that is actually a desirable thing on this. You don't want crisp edges. There needs to be a place for material to go. If you have more material than will fill the die, you need to be able to slowly work that in and let it push out the ends instead of pushing out the sides, where it's going to create little cold shuts. That you turn it, you forge it down, create more little cold shuts, and so on and so forth. That's not a good thing. So you want this relieved, and I'm actually going to take a die grinder and relieve that a little bit more along the sides. And I'm going to shape this entry portion a little bit. I think I want this bar to flare a little bit more. So what that means at this point is a whole lot of grinding. I do hope you're enjoying this project. I just want to take a moment and thank each and every one of you for taking your time to watch the videos that I make here at Black Bear Forge. I also want to offer a special thanks to my channel members and my Patreon patrons for providing financial support that really help make these videos possible. Recently, YouTube has made it possible for me to provide early access to channel members of this exact video, just as you're watching it right here on YouTube. Now, over on Patreon, the videos are hosted outside of YouTube. That means I can post the videos ad-free, and if there's a video sponsor, most of the time I can edit out the sponsorship and they get the video sponsor-free. Occasionally there may be a slightly different edit that I can present over on Patreon, so there's a little bit more of a perk for the Patreon patrons than there is for the channel members. But both groups do get early access to the video. So if you're interested in early access, becoming a channel member or Patreon patron will do that for you. If you'd like to see the videos ad-free, that's available over on Patreon. For everyone else, thanks for stopping by to watch the videos. There'd be no point in making the videos if you weren't here watching. Now let's get back to our project. Overall, I'm really happy with the way this is turning out. This is what I saw in my head. The biggest thing I would change at this point is this curved chisel. I think this chisel is too narrow of a U shape, and I want something a little bit broader, but not as tall. I wouldn't mind getting at least one more row of petals in the pine cone as I do the chisel work. So I'll probably go ahead and make another chisel, try this again, see what I think. There are going to be multiple test pieces. Now, this is not an original idea. The original idea comes from an example I've seen at Timberline Lodge on Mount Hood in Oregon. If you've never been to Timberline, every blacksmith should make a trip there if you can do it. Lots of really cool ironwork. A lot of it is a little bit more contemporary. Darrell Nelson had a big part in a lot of that, and I wouldn't be surprised if this idea comes from Darrell Nelson. But there is literally tons of ironwork at Timberline Lodge, and there's lots of great inspiration to be had there. What am I going to do with this? This is going to be part of a firewood rack that I'm making for our living room by the wood stove, and it's going to have 4 vertical posts to stack the firewood in between, and I'm going to put this pine cone on each of those posts. Later, I hope to do a handrail in the house, very much copied right from the one at Timberline Lodge, because I've always liked that, and we'll put these on that handrail because that's where the idea comes from. This did end up being a rather long video, but I do hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have time in your day to get out to your shop, make something, stay safe, wear your safety glasses. We'll see you for the next one.